Greeting, friends, and welcome. I do an online Bible study every week. It's called the Wednesday Bible Study because it happens on Wednesday. And we've had so many interesting things. We've talked about Jesus and Judaism, Jesus and music, Jesus and mental health, Jesus and race. It's been really interesting. I decided this week I landed a conversation with a longtime friend, Bishop Patrick Streiff, who's the bishop over Poland and Romania. So he's on the front lines dealing with refugees who are fleeing out of Ukraine. So this is Jesus and Ukraine. I'm going to play a conversation that I had with him. I think you'll really enjoy it. Hang on. Toward the end, he tells the most moving story about a Ukrainian refugee. A pregnant woman came to a Methodist church in Poland, and right after she arrived, she gave birth. And the whole church family was there to surround her in love. There's no clearer image of what the gospel is about. You think of Jesus being born on the run in Bethlehem, right? Such a beautiful thing. I know you'll want to support the work that we're doing in Poland, trying to support with food, shelter, medicine, so many things that refugees need. If you go to our church website, myersparkumc.org, you just scroll down not far and you'll see how to help with Ukraine. I know you want to give and give generously. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Bishop Patrick Streiff. Bishop Streiff.
Okay. Good to see you.
It's good to see your face, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Very busy in these moments because of all what is going on in the general church and in the Ukraine, as you can imagine, besides some regular work. Today we have the auditing in our office, so that's part of the regular work.
You and our fellow Methodists there have been deeply in our prayers. And I know you'll recall this, you were in our sanctuary on World Communion Sunday 7 or 8 years ago.
Yes, yes, I well remember with Bishop Leland.
That was a great thing. And so on World Communion Sunday, we celebrate what is true all the time, is that the miracle of our fellowship isn't just that we can talk to each other by Zoom at another continent, but that God has called us into this body of Christ together. And it's just such a beautiful thing. Thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you.
I want to ask you in a minute about Ukraine and the work there. But first, just a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Basel, close to the borderline with Germany and France. Went to school there. And so I'm originally German speaking, but then most of my ministry as a pastor was in the French part of Switzerland.
I know you're fluent in German, French, English. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, I've been able to visit there some. It's just a fascinating area. What's Methodism like in Eastern Europe, kind of pre this war?
Yeah, in our part, which is my episcopal area, we have the countries from Poland down to the Balkans that have been former communist countries. So, of course, you can imagine that they had quite a change in '89 with the opening up. But it always belonged to the episcopal area, and the episcopal area of Central and Southern Europe was the only one that crossed really the kind of Iron Curtain, as it is often said, where it was always one bishop for East and West together. So personal relationships over very different situations in society have been very strong all of the time. And then, of course, with the change after '89, there was primarily in the beginning a huge economic crisis in these countries. And also a big opening up for the gospel and to hear about the gospel, even if these countries were had often quite strong state churches before. But around 2000, it changed a lot in these countries in a way that all the kind of economic thinking, I need to have a good education, need a lot of money, have a good job, etc. All of that came much more to the forefront. There is much less spiritual openness in the population than in the 90s.
That's probably true in the United States as well. So tell us about the current crisis. You're on the ground there. Tell us what you're experiencing, what you're seeing, refugees, churches trying to respond. Share with us what's going on there.
Yes. When the war broke out on that Thursday morning, I heard it in the news, and then about 3-4 hours later, I got a phone call from the leading superintendent in Poland saying, Bishop, have you heard that the war has broken out, and we have already thousands flooding in with the trains in Przemyśl, which is the train station just on the border from Ukraine to Poland. Can you help us? Because we have a very small church there in that location. And they were, of course, together with others, trying to reach out and to help. So that was just the beginning, right from the beginning. Now we have probably towards 2 million that have gone to Poland, another million to other countries to the west of the Ukraine. Of course, Poland has so many Ukrainian refugees now because there has been a big Ukrainian population before, and it has the longest borderline to the Ukraine towards the west. And the language is relatively close. They can quite well understand each other. And the western part of Ukraine at one point belonged to Polish territory because the borderlines have changed so many times over the 20th century with the world wars, etc. So there are a lot of very normal relationships going on. Or in another part of Western Ukraine, Uzhhorod and Kamenitsa, where we have Methodist churches, they belong to our episcopal area before, because at one time it was Slovak territory, at one time it was Hungarian territory, and then it became Ukrainian. So we sometimes think that borderlines have always been the same, but particularly in Europe, through the world wars, it has changed a lot. And so there was a lot of relationships going on, which is very helpful at present.
What's the experience like for those refugees? I mean, they must be full of grief, anger. They're hungry. Tell us what's their life like right now?
There are very different situations of refugees because some have some friends, families where they go to. That's comparatively easier. Others have no idea where to go to and simply flee the country. In many situations, it's only women with children because the men are obliged to stay back home. Men cannot leave the country unless there is a number, I don't know exactly the number, if you have more than 4 children or something like that, then you can leave with the family. But otherwise you have to stay in the country. And in the eastern part of the Ukraine, the territory that had been occupied in 2014, people were strongly pushed to evacuate towards Russia. So there you have several hundred thousands that have gone to Russia. So in all of the surroundings, we have refugees. And then, for example, in Hungary, there are many more who have some Hungarian roots and then go to Hungary. So it's a little bit, you try to go there if you can choose. You try to go there where you have certain connections so that you find help.
So tell me, what are the churches doing, especially there in Poland? We've been in connection with, I'll butcher his name, Sławomir Rodozinski, who's a district superintendent there. Tell, what are the Methodist churches doing there to try to aid refugees as they flood into Poland?
Yes, in Poland is the country where we have the most local churches and pastors, probably up to about 40 local churches, reaching usually a community of perhaps towards 4,000 people. So everything is much smaller than you are used to in the US. And Poland is a big country, so the local churches are far distant often from each other. And the church buildings are usually quite small. But one of the first reactions was that pastors have simply opened the church buildings. So, for example, in the main church in Warsaw, they have put mattresses in the worshiping room to have as many people that they can host there. They have an English-speaking school in Warsaw, so they have used some of that space of the school to house and offer possibilities for these people coming in. And some of the older pastors still spoke Russian. That's easier then also for understanding for people coming in as refugees. In Poland, the main work in our churches is really to open up church buildings or private homes so that you can have refugees coming in. And one important thing, and that was really a very positive surprise for me, as well governments as churches were extremely open, not only the Methodist Church, but also the other churches, to help the refugees, to host them, to give structures, because we have seen other waves of refugees from outside Europe, where often governments have made a lot of restrictions, closed down borders, etc. But here, in this crisis of the Ukraine, also governments have been very helpful to give first aid and work. So it's a good working together between governments and the civil society and the churches for bringing help.
We've been collecting offerings to support the work there, and are pleased to be able to do so. Seems like a small thing, but it does matter.
And that's great. And I see a huge wave of solidarity in our churches in Europe and also from the United States. And that's really great to see that solidarity. And looking also at some past events of really crisis, there is usually in society, in the beginning, a big wave. And then people get a little bit tired of the problems. And one of the positive experiences in the churches is that church people, even if they get tired sometimes, they know that they want to do as much good as possible and continue to do good, even if it needs a long emphasis to bring hope, because I think that crisis will not go away so fast, and even if there is a ceasefire at one point, perhaps, how much destruction will there be? How much rebuilding effort needed? Will these people be able to go back, or will their houses be destroyed, etc.? So it will stay for a long time. And I think we are really called faithfully to continue to help those who are suffering.
Yeah, we will strive not to grow weary and continue to support this work over a long period of time. There are Methodists in Ukraine also.
Yes, there are Methodists in the Ukraine. We have churches in different parts, spread out over different parts of the Ukraine. A few have been in those territories already occupied in 2014. Which then related more to Russian annual conferences or the Crimea, for example, and then the other parts that are in central or western Ukraine. And we have continued to have contacts, particularly to those closer to the western border, because some are close to Poland, others are close to Slovakia and Hungary.
Well, we stand with you. We pray for you. We love you. Somebody asked me the other day, where is God in all of this? You're a bishop, a theologian. How would you answer that? Where is God in all of this?
Well, for me, God is really there in the cry of the suffering. Bishop Kigay, who is the bishop for Russia and Ukraine, made several posts very courageously just before the war broke out, and then when it broke out, and just when it broke out, he shared a picture of a Finnish artist, the crying angel. It is an angel crying, sitting down, carried by two teenagers or young adults. And he wrote a meditation on it, that where people are crying now, Christ is present. And that we as Christians are present where people are crying and suffering. Because I think our Christian faith can give us strength to be there with the suffering people. And just perhaps one example of that, also in Poland, it has been a family where the woman was pregnant, came to find refuge in a Methodist church building. And the day after she came, she gave birth to a new child.
Wow.
And everyone in the congregation also welcomed them and helped them in that situation of that family with several children and now a newborn baby. And I think that's part of Christian community.
That's a beautiful image, Bishop. Of course, God came to us in the form of a baby, His name, Jesus, means Lord help. It's a cry. His nickname is Emmanuel, which is God with us. So that's such a beautiful image of that child being born. In my sermon on Sunday, I quoted Thomas Merton, who he wrote this in his journal during the Vietnam War, but he was saying part of the duty of the church is to talk about and pray for peace, even when there's war, that God's work is mysteriously being done, even when there is not peace, when we speak of peace and pray for peace.
Yeah. And then perhaps another experience which we have made, what the smallest and most recent country where we have United Methodist work is Romania. We have only 3 congregations now there. So it's very small, but they have always been very active in outreach, social diaconal. They have several NGOs where they work with children in orphanages, etc. And all of a sudden, that very, very small Romanian United Methodist Church, because of that network with NGOs, has done a formidable work, wonderful, reaching out to refugees. And just last summer, in the main church in Cluj, they had for a long time that dream that they would like to have a kind of community center to work in the larger community. They had their worship services in one room of a hotel, and the superintendent there has a long-standing relationship to the owner of the hotel, and the owner of the hotel wanted to give it up, the hotel. And so finally, last year, we made a leap of faith and said, we rent that hotel for 10 years, and they can start to build a community center. Rent out some of the hotel rooms for guests, and the other are some NGOs that have their headquarters there. Now it is filled with refugees, and they can use all their networks of NGOs to work in the center of Cluj, Napoca, for refugees coming in. So God has led things in miraculous ways. But you need to be careful. You need to be careful in such situations. Just another example from Romania. They had contact with one of the orphanages so that they could bring these orphans to Romania in security. On the transportation, at one point, they had to change who makes transportation, and strangely, the bus that should have brought the kids did not arrive. So they became suspicious. In the end, someone had offered transportation who had bad thoughts, taking these children, probably to Italy, as a kind of, how do you say that in English?
Trafficking?
It's not trafficking, yes.
Oh.
For trafficking with children. So you need to be careful, because there are people who want to make profit in such situations. So we try to coordinate through our office, on one hand to coordinate help, but also to coordinate that they get the kind of help, advice, support that is needed so that they can do their work as helpful as possible in this big crisis.
Bishop Streiff, we're grateful for you and your life and your ministry and your work. Is there any last message you would have for us Methodists here in America in this situation?
In any such situation of terrible war, of tensions that raise up, there is always a temptation that you see all the others as enemies. For example, seeing Russia only as bad and all the Russians. Not all Russians would be in favor of that war.
No.
Of course, they are so much under the official publicity and television and everything that most people only hear that. And in Russia, you can be in prison for 15 years if you say it is a war. Because it's not allowed to speak openly about it. So I think there is always a tendency that in conflicts, you see all of the others as enemies. And I think it's important that we keep a peace of heart that is willing to reach out to others. One of the wonderful other examples is in Prague. We have in Prague, among our migrant communities, a church of Russian and Ukrainian people, Russian-speaking church in Prague, led by a Russian-speaking pastor. Most of the people are Ukrainians, perhaps 2/3 or 3/4, but they have ministered so far already before the war together in a huge unity and reaching out to people, whether Russians or Ukrainians, coming to Prague to minister to them, and they have continued that now in that wartime. So I think that's part of the reconciliation that Christ can bring among us, even if there is nationalistic spirit around and all kinds of huge tensions. And that's for me really the experience of what the Spirit of God can do among us. And I hope that this will continue and be strengthened.
That's part of the beauty of the body of Christ and the work of the church in the world. Bishop, thank you so much for your time and your ministry and your friendship. And I hope we can talk again before too long.
Yes, thank you. And give greetings to all the congregation. And thank you. Thank you very much for your support.
All right. Thank you so much, Bishop.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.